Okay. This is going. Yeah, go ahead and get started. That'd be great. Cool. All right. You guys ready to go? All right. So we left off with the with Secretary of State Daniel Webster under John Tyler and the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, the formal border between basically the everything from the Mississippi to northern Maine that was a result of the Aroostook or Pork and Beans War between lumberjacks, and this obviously keeps us out of war with because the lumberjacks got a lot of pork and beans. Kept us out of war with England, but it also gave the North larger borders, available resources. What were those two available resources we talked about? They came out of the Mesabi Range and the in northern Maine. Coal's a good guess, but that's not. Iron, very good. And lumber, excellent. Iron and lumber. Okay. So, aren't you working? There we go. Polk in the Oregon Territory. Polk will run for president. This is going to be the election of 1844. This is one of a number of times where Henry Clay had run and will be defeated. Polk runs on a Manifest Destiny platform. He pretty much has like a list of things he wants to do. He wants to lower the tariff, which what group is going to be excited about that? South, yeah, the South, right? Southern farmers. Another thing that Polk is going to want to do is achieve Manifest Destiny, and he wants to get the Oregon Territory settled, and he wants to gain California, and he openly campaigns on these promises. The main thing that he campaigns on is the campaign slogan 5440 or fight. He wants all of the Oregon Territory. So we're talking about basically what we would know as present day Oregon, Washington, and all the way up into British Columbia. He was what we would consider a dark horse candidate, kind of came out of nowhere. He is by birth and education a son of North Carolina. He actually attended the University of North Carolina, one of the oldest state colleges in the country. And then he will become what we would sort of call like the coonskin congressman. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's guys like Clay and Crockett and Davy Crockett and Andrew Jackson and James K. Polk. They're guys that went out into western states and got involved in politics because they had opportunity and less competition. So he's going to be one of these guys. He'll get his political career started in Tennessee and will be elected president. Did you have a question, Gavin?
No, it just sounded like dark horse candidate.
Yep, that's a really good example. I would say that Polk, that would be a really good parallel to run between the two of them. Yeah. All right, so he does actually follow through with every one of his campaign promises. Believe it or not, he's probably one of the few presidents that you could look back and gather up the campaign promises, and they were followed through with in a single term. Polk only runs one term, and the job pretty much killed the man. He died just a few months after he left office. He worked like 16-hour days. With that being said, the Oregon Territory will be split along the Columbia River Valley. England brokers a deal that they'll keep British Columbia and the island of Vancouver, and the United States will gain present-day Oregon, Washington State, part of Northern California, and part of Idaho, and even a small portion of Montana. So the Oregon Territory is settled. This leads to a group of explorers. Sam did some research on one of these guys, John C. Fremont. A lot of you guys have learned about Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson. These folks had ties back to Virginia. A lot of those trailblazers, hunters, trappers, traders, had ties to the Commonwealth. Oregon Trail, this is the trail that was blazed mainly by Fremont. Parts of the trail already existed, but Fremont saw a desperate need to provide a clear trail with maps that were accurate, and it leads to families making their way out from Independence to the Oregon Territory. Anybody grow up playing Oregon Trail? Yeah. Oh, cool. All right. No, just a few? All right. It's a huge deal when I was a kid. All right. I'm definitely that game brings back some fond memories. All right, so we've got Polk and Promise Number 2, Campaign Promise Number 2 or 3, however you want to look at it. I don't know if you would categorize the Oregon. I would say Oregon was his top priority, and California was likely his second priority, and then you could like throw the tariff in there somewhere. But the premise here is that Polk wants to buy California for $25 million, so he sends a envoy led by a diplomat named John Slidell. We're not done talking about Slidell, because Slidell will ultimately end up as a Confederate diplomat during the American Civil War. Slidell will go to Mexico City to meet with ministers from Santa Anna's government about the American purchase of California to successfully complete Manifest Destiny. Something to keep in mind here is that as John Tyler is on the way out and Polk is on the way in, Texas will officially become a U.S. state, and they will enter as a slave state, right? So when Slidell and the envoy arrive in Mexico City, foreign diplomats are not interested in meeting with the Americans, nor are they interested in selling California for $25 million. So Polk sees an opportunity, and that opportunity is disputed territory. That disputed territory is the territory that lies between the Nueces River in Texas and the Rio Grande. Texas was claiming that the Rio Grande was their border with Mexico. Mexico was claiming that the Nueces was the border with Texas. So this is going to lead Polk to sending out not only 4,000 soldiers led by Zachary Taylor, but he also sends out news reporters so the telegraph lines can send back news on how this particular event will transpire. On the left here we have John Slidell. On the right we have Zachary Taylor. Did you guys already start the clock? Good. All right. Cool. All right. So American blood, American soil. Obviously, we've got some question marks here. So this all begins because the U.S. Army lies somewhere between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, and I'm going to show you where that is on a map here momentarily. And U.S. telegraphs and newspapers report back that through are you all familiar with the Associated Press, the AP? Have you ever not as an advanced placement, but have you guys ever noticed that you've read a news story online or in a newspaper and it says in parentheses AP, Associated Press? Take a look for that in the future. The Associated Press gets involved as, like, they come together as an organized news outlet because of the telegraph system. Do y'all remember who invented the telegraph? Samuel Morse. So Morse code, right? All right. So we'll talk more about the telegraph later, but the Associated Press reports back that the war has begun. But as you all have lived in the most recent news cycle, and they're like, oh, this is a travesty, fake news, that we've never seen anything like this before. That is not correct, okay? Fake news has been around forever. Well, not forever, but for a very long time, okay? These particular stories that were being published during the Mexican War, they had a political slant, right? So if they were reporting for a Democratic, like, political outlet, they would have been like, huzzah, America at war, Mexico has invaded the United States. What? That's crazy. Why would Mexico invade the United States? But if it's going to a Whig outlet, the story might be written a little bit different, where they wouldn't agree with American involvement in a war for manifest destiny. All right, so this becomes hotly debated in Congress. The Whig Party is still, even though it was a third-party movement, has quite a few seats in the House and in the Senate. And some Whig congressmen are saying, I don't know if I want to declare war on Mexico because where did this even happen? And one guy in particular that brought his case to the House was Abraham Lincoln, who had been elected as a Whig in the House from the state of Illinois. So Lincoln's original nickname was not Honest Abe. It was Spotty Lincoln. That's what everybody called him because he wanted to know what spot the war had begun, as did a number of other Whigs and even Democrats who were a little bit reluctant to send a bunch of soldiers, but also you have to realize, guys, we don't have a large standing army at this period of time. So you're going to have to mobilize soldiers, probably going to have to call on state militia, etc., and that's what they're going to end up doing. In fact, the Virginia militia served during this conflict. The Virginia militia served during the Mexican War. All right, so we've got people like Lincoln and Charles Sumner who are against the war, but Congress will narrowly pass a war declaration pushed by Polk and the Democrats, and it will be backed by Polk and the United States will declare war. There are 14 major battles and one additional event that I want to point out. So some of the battles that I'm going to bring up will be areas where Civil War generals, well, all of the Civil War veterans that served in this war are going to have combat experience in these particular battles. There's just a few I'm going to highlight. This, ladies and gentlemen, all eyes should be up here on the map. That is the disputed territory between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. So basically, Mexico and the United States and Texas are claiming all of that disputed land. All right. So, a few of the battles that I want to look at. We got Taylor's battle at Monterey and Buena Vista. These were a couple that we read about before we left class last week. We also have these battles fought in and around Mexico City, and this is the amphibious assault led by Winfield Scott, which will ultimately lead to the surrender of Mexico City and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Another important thing that I want to point out as well is up in Monterey, above Monterey, which is a little difficult to see on the projector here. That is the Bear Flag Republic, and Mason brought this up last week, and that is California. The Bear Republic will be led by John C. Fremont, who Sam did his research on, and Mason said, made a comment about them becoming their own country for a 2-year period. So that's an important part of the story as well, because that's going to allow California, that's going to give California the opportunity to come in as a free state. Okay, so the U.S. operations are going to be led by a handful of generals. Kearny's going to lead a army through the Santa Fe Trail. John C. Fremont's going to lead the Bear Flag Republic. Taylor and his 4,000 are going to advance on Buena Vista, and then Winfield Scott, United States Marines, and his soldiers are going to fight at Chapultepec and ultimately defeat the Mexican army at Mexico City. Do not be fooled, okay? If we were together last year, I've talked about this. Maybe you did. I don't know how much time those of you that were not with me had to get into this last year. The Mexican army was a formidable fighting force, okay? Don't think that they were some ragtag army that didn't know what they were doing. They were trained. They didn't have nearly the finance that we had to support the war effort, but we were outnumbered in many of these battles. This also lends to the expertise of the commanders at the time. Winfield Scott, Zachary Taylor, Kearny, Stephen Kearny, and Fremont were all extremely talented and well-organized generals on the field. Not to mention, as we read in the article in the Halls of Montezuma from the prologue in Battle Cry Freedom, it sets the scene for how all these young military officers that are coming out of West Point, some that are coming out of the Virginia Military Institute, some Naval Academy guys, they are going to cut their teeth in the Mexican War. That's where they get their battle experience. Guys like George Meade and Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Thomas J. Jackson, later Stonewall, they're going to all serve together under Winfield Scott, and other guys like Pickett serve under Taylor, among others. All right. So on the left, Fremont leads the Bear Republic. On the right, Winfield Scott, aka Old Fuss and Feathers, will accept the surrender of the Mexican army. Nicholas Trist is going to settle the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and for a little bit more money, about $30 million, the United States is going to end up getting California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, the disputed territory along the Texas border, and Arizona and New Mexico. So all that Mexican cession. All right, a little bit about the details of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. There's going to be an armistice between Trist and Santa Anna's people, but Santa Anna actually takes the armistice as a bribe and continues to fight. Trist will stick around to officially negotiate the treaty on February 2nd, 1848. This will give the United States its land to officially claim manifest destiny. Everything from Mexico and west of the Rockies all the way to the Pacific have been obtained. The U.S. pays $15 million to Mexico, clears a $3.5 million debt. And all of the land, like I mentioned before, they're going to gain parts of, I left out parts of Wyoming, what I said earlier. All right, the bill passes the Senate, and again, the original cost was about $25 million. The United States would pay 18.25, but the real price tag was really somewhere due to debts and everything else, cost of the war, the whole 9 yards. The real cost was somewhere close to about $30 million, give or take. It is a little under, a little over the whole the cost and price of everything. On the left here, those are the halls of Montezuma, folks. That's what the Marine Corps hymn is referring to. That is the surrender of the Mexican Army and the occupation of the American Army under Winfield Scott. That is what McPherson was referring to when he talked about the Army, the ragtag American Army marching through the streets of Mexico City to the songs of Yankee Doodle and Hail to the Chief. And then on the right, there's Nicholas Trist. All right, so Polk and loss in Mexico. Let's just take a look at what is gained, Polk's profit, but what is lost. Obviously, the United States is going to gain a significant amount of land. The only land acquisition that was larger than this would have been up to this point, would have been the Louisiana Purchase. After this, there will be another significant land purchase that we'll talk about at the end of the Civil War, and that's going to be Alaska. So we gain more respect globally. Manifest destiny is achieved, but as soon as this war ends, the dispute over slavery begins, and that's going to lead us to David Wilmot, who is a congressman from Pennsylvania. He comes up with a proviso. The Wilmot Proviso says there will be no slavery in the Mexican territory. This bill was this particular proviso was attached to several bills, and it kept passing the House, but it got blocked in the Senate. Not to mention, it leads Southern senators to issuing a gag order, which we'll talk a little bit about later, on the issue of slavery, basically saying, you all can't mess with slavery, period. So again, this is going to be one of those moments in American history where it's very difficult for people to say, for you to hear people say, oh, the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. Absolutely not, okay? Were there a lot of people fighting in the Civil War and could have cared less about slavery and weren't fighting for slavery? Of course there were. There were a lot of common people that served on both sides and could have cared less about slavery. But if we look at the politics and the money, you got to go back to the Wilmot Proviso. You got to go back to some of these little random pieces of legislation that got blocked over that issue in that institution. All right, so we're only about 13 years away from the Civil War at this period, and by the end of this lesson, we'll be getting through the election of 1860 and the shots at Fort Sumter. So this is all of that land gained as a result of the Mexican War. California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and all that disputed territory of Texas. A little bit about Wilmot. There he is on the right. That's David Wilmot. How am I doing on time? Sweet. So, outlawed, yeah, he wants to outlaw slavery in the territory gained from the Mexican Cession. Congressman from Pennsylvania. It was attached to several bills but never passed. Passed in the House, blocked in the Senate. This ultimately leads to the birth of the Free Soil Party They are going to be led by Charles Sumner, who becomes pretty instrumental in the founding of the Republican Party as well. They will run, the Free Soil Party will run one candidate in the next election, and that was former President Martin Van Buren. And then Wilmot will later become a part of the Republican Party and becomes a founding father of that party, as was Lincoln. So this is a good place for us to stop because I can hear alarms going off. Did you guys have any questions about Mexican War, Wilmot, or how this is going to create a bigger problem for that division? We good? All right, cool. So next class, we're going to get into the elections of the lame ducks. We're going to get into the Compromise of 1850. We'll get to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I think that's probably as far as we'll get next class. All right.